Pardon. Om Shanti. Welcome to this session of Interview with Raj Yogi. And our topic today is self-mastery. As usual, we'll start with a little bit of a reflection. I bring my focus completely into this moment, but not looking outwards, looking inwards at my inner world, being an observer of my thoughts and feelings in this moment. No judgment, no efforts to control, just to observe. Even this act of observing requires some level of mastery. The mind might wander, but I, the observer, I remain fully present and alert. So I might watch the mind wander and gently bring it back into focus. This art of observing requires practice. And I will practice if I understand there is benefit. I've spent so much time observing the outer world. Now let me learn to observe my inner world. Om Shanti. Om Shanti. And welcome to those who joined Interview for Raj Yogi. And Jane, I hope we got your name right. Feel free to reach out to us. I know you had some things you were sharing about Fort McMurray. Please feel free to reach out to us through Calgary at ca.brahmakumaris.org. So tonight's session is about self-mastery, and the slogan that we are actually looking at: those who rule themselves are true self-sovereigns, masters of themselves. So sometimes we hear that word self-control, and we can sometimes hear it with perhaps maybe of a different spin. maybe in a violent way. So what does self-control, self-mastery look like in the world of Raja Yoga?
I think the first thing to realize is that everything that we're trying to do in Raj Yoga is to encourage peace and happiness.
Are we more audible? Is this better? Just waiting for a message from those on Instagram.
We'll carry on, and hopefully it is audible. But this idea that our focus is on inner peace and happiness, so everything that we're practicing ideally promotes that. And so there wouldn't be violence in this stage of self-mastery that we're focusing on. What there would be is a very specific form of power called spiritual power. And that's actually what affords us self-mastery. Things become violent when there is a lack of power. So when there is true power, there is not violence, there is mastery.
I really enjoyed when you had shared out in the commentary about observing. and the things I was thinking about that, of course, it's not particular in Raj Yoga, but sometimes souls are trying to redirect their mind in terms of focusing on a candle or focusing on their breathing, and they can redirect it, and then they find it goes out of focus again. In Raja Yoga, we are specifically looking at redirecting our thoughts. Is there something that would be a missing ingredient in both respects in terms of self-mastery?
I think a huge part of self-mastery is that we are acknowledging what is going on rather than ignoring. So, because we want it to be sustainable, and if I don't acknowledge what is going on, it's still there, and it will, if you will, subvert what I'm trying to do at any given moment. So I want to understand, this is a huge part of this very peaceful approach to self-control, is the role of understanding. So I acknowledge what's there and I want to understand it. And we're given a body of knowledge to work with to support that understanding. And it's amazing how much power, personal power, can come through understanding rather than forcing.
What has your experience been like with understanding, like with your journey with Raja Yoga when you first began? Of course, it strengthens through time.
Mm-hmm. One thing I really liked is that if I notice something happening in my head, what Raj Yoga teaches us is how to get to the seed of what is happening. So it's quite a deep level of understanding. And then I can address things at the seed. So it's very similar to a medical approach. If someone is showing certain symptoms or ailments, we could try to just address the symptoms, but we actually want to understand what's behind the symptoms, get to the seed of the issue and address things at the seed.
It's interesting because I feel that this is more just talking about what is the issue. Many do recognize that ego is a huge problem, but
Mhm.
that's as far as one can get. Would you say that there's something deeper to that as a seed?
Well, the beauty of this understanding, this approach of understanding, is we're not just looking at trying to understand, we also want to explore who is the one who is understanding. So we understand from a certain position or awareness. We say, I, the soul, am studying, am understanding. And that otherwise, there's nowhere, I can say it's ego, but I have nowhere to stand outside of the ego and observe what's going on. So Raj Yoga gives me this position to stand in, spirituality, soul consciousness, sometimes we even say self-respect, but this place to stand. I know many say, is there life after ego? They start to realize ego is everywhere and in everything. So who am I outside of that? So Raj Yoga specializes in helping me to understand who I am outside of ego, so I can stand there and observe ego and not be overwhelmed.
With this title of self-mastery, the first thing that actually came to mind was a physical example of slow, controlled movement.
Mm-hmm.
And could you share, what, because I know you do a lot of physical fitness related to that,
Mm-hmm.
but your physical experience of that and its parallel in spirituality.
Well, it's interesting when you watch someone, again, it's about power. When you watch someone who has a sufficient strength or power to control their movements, they actually don't look violent. They look the opposite. When it's coming from that very deep power or core power, they look very easy and graceful and light. Whereas when someone doesn't have a lot of power, it actually looks quite violent and difficult and heavy. So this capacity to have slow, controlled movements require incredible development of power, but at a very deep level at the core. And that's really what enables the movements to seem so royal and graceful.
It's interesting. I think I remember you were mentioning that you were teaching a client or coaching a client. And I don't know if this actually makes sense for souls, but let's just say you're taking a barbell and you're lifting it up. And it's really easy just to, right? And then, but you were talking about even that slow controlled movement of bringing it back down again. And I don't think, we think about that's just as important. I don't know if you would know what's going on, that there would just be sort of a loss of sight, that would be just as important as just how you moderate, how you are actually moving equipment or weight.
I think it is, just as we talked earlier about ego, that, the ego that we see in physical movement, going for the quantity, the speed. And so the things that actually build control and mastery tend to get ignored because I'm trying to go for these particular outcomes. So that kind of gets in the way. Even today I was watching, it's very hard. I often will cue slow controlled movements, and I've noticed it's a struggle for souls to actually do that it's a very deep conditioning that faster, stronger, harder is better, and not necessarily actually. To me, the sign of having real strength is being able to control the movement. But it's, again, the sort of visual or ego-based aspects of outcome can tempt one to ignore that.
And what do you feel that slow controlled movement looks like, spiritually speaking?
Again, if it's coming from that deep power, which we call purity, that deep power, it's just not reactive. Just as with physical movement, when they're the opposite of slow, and it's not to say that those who do slow controlled movement can't also do what we call quick twitch, very quick movements, but even their quick movements look very different. They look very graceful. So spiritually, there would just not be that reactivity. It would be just this incredible, we call it royalty or ease in terms of how I operate. Even if I'm faced with an incredible challenge or something that seems to require a quick response, there's still, I've noticed in the senior students, there's still this kind of ease and patience and royalty in the face of challenges.
Could you clarify then in terms of this aspect of peace, just when you were sharing that? It reminded me that many find this word peace to be, well, it's a variety of experiences or perceptions of this word. And just when you're sharing, I was thinking about peace as a very royal experience, but I would feel that many have perhaps maybe an understanding or an idea of peace that may not necessarily be of that level.
We suggest in the study that peace is based on purity. I think that really helps because so much, peace has been connected to some external conditions that make me feel that way, or to remove myself from a noisy or peaceless situation, rather than to have this, again, power of purity within that creates that royalty and grace. So to know what is the seed of peace is that purity.
It would feel that there are quite a few, perhaps maybe not real experiences that can get in the way.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking, I had a very short interaction the other day at the bank, and the teller I found fascinating. He's just helping me with the transaction, but every single interaction he performed was remarkably polite and royal. And I could deeply feel the peace behind that. There was one point when he wanted to cut a stub to give to me. And so he's looking for scissors and he's asking this, and he never let go of that stage. I found it really, I felt so much purity. And it was self-mastery. It was very interesting in action. And again, we have concepts of peace, but just a simple day-to-day interaction. In other words, it's never just, I'm going to be on in certain times, but it was just this constant state of operating.
Would you say that it's a feeling that you sense, that it's not just something that I put on in a certain situation?
Yeah, it was the consistency of it that really touched me. A very seemingly trivial interaction, but he was consistently operating with this vibration, this feeling, his words and actions. It was all very consistent with there being purity there.
So when it comes to one's own self-mastery, what does that consistency look like when we're not really masters at this time? We're moving in that direction.
I think this is where the aim and objective that we have in the study, that formula, is very useful. In physical fitness, if I want slow controlled movement in everything, not just weights or when I'm exercising, but even how I walk down the street, everything I will have to focus or aim or practice conditioning what is very invisible, my core, and practice over and over until it becomes my natural nature physically. So that we say, we have the joke that you can spot a dancer from a mile away because every day they're practicing the same thing over and over until it becomes their natural nature, physically speaking, their natural posture. So it's not just when they're dancing, it's all the time, standing in the elevator, standing in the line, you can tell they have a very natural posture. So similarly, in the spiritual practice, we're asked to focus on the core, the spiritual core, which is called awareness. We're asked to practice this over and over and over. And then the self-mastery starts to become very natural all the time, not just when I want to be on, but all the time, because my core is so strong, my spiritual core.
Would you say that there is an importance of love for one's practice? Let's say in this aspect, the core, the spiritual core.
I think, yeah, we only stay with practices that we find rewarding or enjoyable. I can do something because I feel I should. And in this case, it's really, you actually need a lot of love, because there are inner forces that will try to block the practice, right? Ego being top of the list. So I really have to have a very keen interest in doing this so as not to be diverted by those inner forces.
What happens if one has had previous injuries and maybe previous malpractice, so to speak, where even that kind of can get in the way and they want to do the basic exercise, whatever it is, but even the basic exercise is not done properly. And they want to have love for it. Have you ever had, in a very physical example, like clients that you've had to work with that and that spiritual parallel?
Yeah, actually, it's usually an injury that forces them to go back to basics. Unfortunately, it has to get to the point of an injury that will really encourage them to go back and assess, what am I doing, and maybe change what I'm doing at that very basic level. And the same happens spiritually. We call it a crisis. Unfortunately, it's not until a crisis happens that some might actually start to question, what am I doing internally? How am I operating? Maybe something needs to change. Now, it seems to take very extreme crises to really wake us up sometimes. So, but that's definitely been something that I've seen in the physical fitness realm, is that when someone's injured, they are a little bit easier to work with in terms of transforming things at a very basic level, foundation.
How about in this spiritual study? Do you find that there can be that spiritual injury? Is that common to, is it a good thing to see within oneself?
I think, it depends on the soul, but I think almost everyone who comes into the spiritual practice has experienced a crisis or spiritual injury. Now, what that spiritual injury looks like could be very incognito. So we have the example of Brahma Baba, the first student, who externally it looked like there was no crises going on in his life. But internally, there was a lot of restlessness and questioning and this feeling that something needs to change.
How does honesty link to that then? That there is an injury, probably been doing a bunch of things that hasn't really been helpful. And yet, you can't really be honest if you don't really know what you're really looking for.
I think the first honesty perhaps then is, I don't know. Like, I know I don't know, to actually admit that I need some help, or I need I don't know what I'm doing. That might be the first honesty. And then as we start to be exposed to new ideas, that creates an increasingly higher level of honesty with the self. Because honesty is the opposite of ego. Ego can't be honest. It will make excuses and rationalize. So the more that I'm cultivating that self-respect, the more clarity I can have.
Do you find, again, just looking at this parallel physical fitness and in this study, in terms of self-mastery, really just focusing on some really core basic practices, and in the study, as you had mentioned, awareness, and the parallel to that in terms of ballet, sounds like you really enjoyed doing the basics. Did you ever find that even though you loved doing the basics, that still ego would get in the way?
Yes, ego manages to get into the way any which way it can. So again, for some, injury can definitely help to stop that getting out of control. Or if there's that sensitivity, if one's lucky enough. I remember when I was in ballet school, I was very lucky. I had one instructor who had come into dance quite late in life when it comes to ballet terms. So I think they were just going into university very late. But so they were what we call a mature student, and they had a short career, and then they became a teacher. But there was, it was the first time that I had an instructor who I would say was extremely honest in their approach. So they would tell us, maybe don't put your legs so high, but focus on the placement. Or maybe find your natural turnout rather than trying to force your leg where you think it's supposed to go. So this was the first time we were given permission to be very honest in our movements. And I felt very lucky because it's far more rewarding, but to be given, so permission is a huge part. It's not a word that ego likes very much, but it's amazing, if you think about it, when you're with someone who is not going to judge, is trying to cultivate true personal growth, it's very easy to have honest conversations with them. This is what's going on. So we kind of need to create that culture inside of ourselves. And I think we do when we get to the point of what we call disinterest. I'm just tired of trying to maintain an image. So come what may, I would like to just be my authentic self. When we get to that point and start to create a culture inside where I can have honest conversations, give myself permission, I think that's really healthy.
Mm-hmm. Would you feel that honesty is something that also can be one can improve it? So
I do. Again, so much is connected again to the foundation, the core, that the more the self-respect or spiritual identity grows, the easier it is to be honest. I don't have to be afraid and hide things because I don't feel that my value will decrease. So the more I have this foundation of self-worth, the easier it is to be very honest with yourself without fear.
It's interesting just what popped in my head. I was suddenly just thinking about athletes that I would, I would say personally no, but when you just watch them play, and there are many I found who are, they're very good at what they do, but they have a very good character. And just when you were sharing, I was thinking about integrity linked to honesty, and yet such a beautiful mastery in terms of whatever sport or athleticism they do. There seems to be, I don't know, it seems to be a link.
Yes, we have a beautiful example just recently here in Canada. One of the best hockey players ever, Guy Lafleur, just passed away, and so there's lots of souls talking about that hockey player, and it's very interesting. I mean, his skill set was extremely high, that's an understatement, but they talked about his character a lot, and that he was a gentleman, and that even when he came out of retirement with a different hockey team, and he came to play his old hockey team, even though he was now on the other side, he still was winning everyone's hearts. Everyone was cheering for him, even though he scored a goal against them. They're all cheering. So such a gentleman. I found that really fascinating to be able, as I said, he never came into violence. He maintained a very certain approach, the self-control, the self-mastery, in a game that's become quite reactive at times. So yeah, I think that's always and how it extends beyond the game at that point. It almost goes into a spiritual place because it's about character. So that really inspires people. I think there is a memory inside of that dignity, that grace, that self-respect is attractive to people.
It's from when I was younger, and it's related to what you're sharing that I was in high school actually, and there were some individuals I knew who aspired to go into medical school, but they had such a beautiful character. They just seemed to be good at everything. But what really I found really amazing was their character. It's as if their character was such that they could just be holistic in everything they do, sort of an all-rounder. And it's quite fascinating. Like, it makes me think about back to spirituality in terms of when your sense of awareness is very healthy, it seems to really color everything in your life.
Yeah, I think we actually see this with dancers that when they have a very strong foundation, they can do all sorts of different styles of dance. They can cross over very easily. We see this with movement. We call it literacy. That if I can get the basics, I can do a wide variety of things because they're all based on the same movement mechanics. So similarly in day-to-day life, if I can get certain basics in terms of how we operate as human beings, it's amazing how we can do a variety from administration to communication, from academic to artists. So if we have those basics.
You had shared one time of a ballet dancer, Misty Copeland, and first of all, I don't even know who this soul is, but apparently quite a top in her league, so to speak. And you had at one time shown these YouTube videos of her just doing this very basic, like, I don't know, you have to describe it, but it touched me that, this is someone who is really up there. And first of all, she's actually showing a video of herself just doing this very basic practice. And it was making me think again about that you'd have to love something and actually be able to, the ego doesn't get in the way.
Yes, I think, the particular video is also after injury. So we're back to, what crisis can encourage. And she is actually being corrected through the whole video. So it is a very humbling thing for her to expose to the world. But yeah, I think that to be able to get to the top of your game and stay there, you would have to constantly be revising the basics. It's just not going to be possible to stay at the top of your game.
I feel like it's interesting when you talk about the basics, whether it's the basics. I've seen souls do the scales in piano. I've seen souls in ballet, just these very just basic movements, and how that translates into something so beautiful. And how much, I guess I was thinking about love, but I was also thinking about patience. Is there a connection between the two? Because until you do the basics, I don't really know if you will be able to have such a beautiful practice, so to speak, such as in ballet, and I've seen in piano as well.
Patience always is a product of trust or faith. So I'm very patient because I trust what I'm practicing is going to get me to where I want to go. So I have a lot of faith in practicing the basics, that even though it may not look like I'm advancing or getting anywhere, I'm actually, in the long run, I'm going to be further ahead. And we were just reminded again recently that the most basic thing, the practice of soul consciousness, that we tend to kind of skip over it and race ahead. And in the long run, we land up further behind. So over and over, we keep hearing the message of the importance of basics and trusting that it will get me there, and being patient and honest in my practice.
Would you say then, I mean, yes, there needs to be love. I mean, it's fortunate if one actually loves the basics.
Mm-hmm.
But when you were talking about patience, faith, and that the basics would actually be something that would be so much more holistically beneficial for myself, I was thinking about this aspect of maturity. There seems to be some sort of wisdom to actually be clear that the basics would actually do that.
Yeah, I think there definitely is a depth there that I'm able to see beneath the surface, which is connected to maturity. This is why there's love, that I can sort of see the incognito, not just look at what's going on the surface and think that's the method of progress, but actually see the benefit underneath the surface, which is a fairly mature vision.
Well, it feels like time just flew by, but it really feels like this aspect of self-mastery is such a three-dimensional sense of being in their inner world for that self-mastery to be possible.
Yeah, and I feel that oddly enough that we're talking about very often a criticism, with self-mastery or Raj Yoga, is that it's very self-absorbed. But maybe connected to that maturity, those who are cultivating self-mastery actually have a very caring attitude towards humanity. So it's not just the love of the method or to benefit the self, but there's actually a deep love for others that I want to be able to control, to have that grace, dignity, royalty, integrity in my interactions. So I create very elevated forums for others to operate at their best. So it's the self-mastery actually is very connected to contributing or donating or care for others. I think that's really important.
And finally, then, when you had mentioned about aim and objective of Raj Yoga, it does feel like then you need to have sort of broad understanding of what I'm doing. It's really not just for myself.
No.
Or that I might not really actually understand what that means.
Yeah, I think there's so much. The word understand is huge and central in Raj Yoga. I need to understand what the connection is between the aim and objective. That, okay, I want to be more caring towards others. Well, then I need to definitely focus on how I respond, being able to manage how I respond. Because sometimes we say we're very caring, but it's quite selective. And under certain circumstances, I become reactive or hurtful. So this self-mastery is very, if I can understand that in order to be able to care for others, I need to have cared for the self to become a master. I need to understand that connection. Again, we tend to want to jump ahead and we land up further behind. So the connection needs to be understood.
Well, I think we have come to the completion of tonight's interview. I suppose we'll have a reflection now.
Okay. Sometimes when we hear self-mastery, we do feel it's harsh, disciplined, forceful, even repressive. But when we think about mastery or leadership, which is one and the same, in this case, leadership of the self, very attracted to leaders who are benevolent, nonviolent, have integrity, are caring. So this self-leadership means I guide myself with those same qualities. There's integrity, there's patience, there's caring, there's respect, directed towards the self. I will be honest, I will be clear, but never violent. Looking at how do I manage my own self in a qualitative way. What qualities do I use to manage my own self? It's essential to self-mastery. Om Shanti.
Om Shanti. So, Jade, I hope you can hear us. I hope you're still with us. You're welcome to send a message to the Instagram chat. Our Instagram messaging system, and one of us will be able to reach out to you about one of your questions. Again, you're also welcome to email the center as well. It's at Calgary at ca.brahmakumaris.org. So feel free to reach out to us that way, or also that messaging system that's through Instagram, which is beyond me. I know somebody will be able to reach out to you for sure. But otherwise, in terms of upcoming programs, we do have more English Raj Yoga courses that are being offered. And so the next one starts next week, actually. It's the Wednesdays of May. So the first one will be May 4th, and that's, I believe, it's 6:30 to 8 o'clock in the evening, and that's at the Northeast Center. And feel free to visit the website for the Hindi Raj Yoga courses as well. And we always invite souls to the experience sessions to really experiment with soul consciousness. So again, you have to remember this, it is on the website, but it's on Tuesdays and Thursdays, Fridays and Sundays, 6:30 to 7:30 Mountain Daylight Savings Time. But feel free to visit the website for other sessions. Thank you for joining. Anything I missed?
All good.